question for anybody. Can you see any reason why you wouldn't want to back a global tax on carbon? And I know the comments before was we'd love to be the Congress of the world, but with 5% of the world's population, we are responsible for about 25% of the carbon emissions in public. If you argue what we buy from China, it's probably 30 or 40%. We are by far the economic powerhouse of the world, and through best nation trading status, or whatever the exact term is, we could use our tremendous economic capabilities before they diminish, and they are going to diminish. They're going overseas. Is there anybody here have any ideas why a global tax that could be somewhat significant? Because he's talking about $10 a car, $10 a ton. Now it's like 5 or 10 cents a gallon on the price of gas. That's not going to be enough.
You guys want to?
Well, I think again, I hate to keep beating this horse, but the political obstacles to implementing a global tax would be formidable. Okay? look at the Kyoto negotiations. We have 192 countries banging their heads together every 6 months, trying to agree on even, planting trees in Honduras and giving the Hondurans credit for it. Trying to harmonize global tax systems and getting the political oomph to get something like passed. Sir, if you've got a pathway that makes that happen, I'd love to talk.
I don't think there's any of us that would sit here and say that if you could do that on a global level, that we wouldn't go for it. But the problem is that's not realistic. I'm sorry to say. We can't even pass healthcare in our own country. Come on. I mean, it's just. I would love to.
I guess I'm not looking for a consensus amongst countries. I'm looking for a much more heavy-handed way of doing it. In the form of a tariff, yeah.
There's a question over here. Go ahead.
So for Llwellyn, we knew each other back in the 90s, and it's been a long time since I've seen you, but TFW was great, and I'd like to see the mills survive. And I was wondering, we were looking last fall at the possibility of a carbon tax like the one in BC, but one of the things that we noticed was that we could completely get rid of the B&O tax. Would that help?
She was wondering if we could try to catch up.
Would it help?
Would it help if we were to be able to do this and get rid of the B&O tax?
Yeah, I mean, sure it would. I think the problem is you always have a big disparity between a price signal on carbon, whether it's cap and trade or carbon tax. It's a price signal per ton of carbon. What it takes to, the rate at which that has to be set to drive change in consumer behavior or utility behavior, and I'm not a utility person, just what I've read on that, is so far out in terms of the very low level at which a manufacturing sector would be impacted. We did look at it relative to B&O tax, and some of the numbers that would have to be picked even in just midway in that range were prohibitive for our industry, and B&O tax didn't really compensate for it. And there was, I'm trying to remember which study it was, and pardon for not being more knowledgeable on utility rates, but I read some studies that it would take like $60 to $100 a ton to change utility behavior. $1 to a ton puts us uneconomic with China. I mean, just to give you, a relative perspective on the cost impact.
Right here, go ahead.
Europe has been pricing carbon for almost 4 years, and it had 4 years before that for all the sectors to begin to plan for that. So I would ask the representatives from labor, from the utility industry, and from manufacturing, since I assume you all look laterally at how this is evolving, how your sectors are evolving in Europe, are there lessons to be learned from what has happened in the real world with the carbon pricing for 8 years?
Again, Europe has an industrial policy to where they protect their workers and they tariff, and they, the trade pacts are more solid. If we had some kind of assurances like that, we keep going back to the same thing that we're against any kind of carbon pricing, and that's not true.
No, I'm saying is it helped you understand what you want. I mean, you just gave me a good answer for labor.
From the utility perspective, it's kind of interesting. We can talk about global, even national policies, but utilities, we're basically local. So to kind of put this in perspective in the state of Washington, 23% of the emissions from the state of Washington comes from the electric grid. Out of that 23%, 17% was a Centralia coal plant, right? So, I mean, it kind of is very local. Like right now, there is so much generation from hydro, which is carbon-free, and wind. We've actually shut down every single gas plant, the coal plant, the nuclear plant. Everything is down. So basically, we are operating, except for reliability reasons, sometimes we have to put in the gas plant. So what I'm saying is, we would look at those policies, and we do pay attention to those types of things, but then you have to kind of figure out how it works with your own portfolio. And I just want to say that it's very difficult, because here in the Pacific Northwest, utilities are much more conscientious as far as carbon and making those adjustments. If you look at it nationwide, you're not hearing the same types of discussions in the Midwest or in the Southeast. So that's what I'm saying. We do look at it across the way, but we're not really a force that's really going to move that forward, because I think the Pacific Northwest utilities are already there.
There's a question right here, sir, and then we'll go ahead.
Yeah, we can obviously mitigate the domestic impact of carbon pricing by some of the mechanisms that we discussed earlier in terms of returning dividends, for example. I'm interested in the panel's perspectives on how we deal with our global competitiveness posture. And I think Llwellyn touches on this from her perspective, Jim, I think, as well, in the wish to a global Congress. But I'm really interested in what are the economic and political factors here, and how do we overcome them?
That's a small question.
Answering a hard question.
I'll take a stab at this. It's not going to be a satisfactory answer, because that's just an enormous question. I think you have to attack it on many levels and many dimensions. Clearly, our country, given our position as the #2 carbon dioxide emitter, we do have an obligation to do something, regardless of what other countries do. But we have to have a robust, international diplomacy to negotiate. I'm not sure the Kyoto process is all that productive. Again, getting 192 countries to agree on very complex treaty language is a formidable undertaking. But I am encouraged to see that some of the major emitters, the top 20, which are responsible for about 80% of the emissions, are having some informal conversations and formal conversations about bilateral or multilateral approaches to dealing with carbon emissions. So there'll have to be a lot of diplomacy in the years ahead, so that countries can work together on finding ways that are mutually beneficial to reduce carbon emissions. It is in China's interest to stop polluting so much, even if they don't care about what the rest of the world thinks. They know that dirtying up their rivers and air is not in their best interest. So, finding ways for these countries to work together in ways that reinforce their own self-interest is the way to go. But it's going to take time. It's going to be complicated. Anybody else?